Yo, what is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. Now, man, it's been a while since I've did a video like this. Now, just so you know, this video is. I know a lot of my videos have been like I've had notes to go along with the video. I've got one verse, and that is the one verse that I am basing this whole video on. Now, originally, I wasn't even planning to make a video like this, but like the past couple weeks, I've been noticing, so like talking to people and people I've met, and even in my personal life, how this verse comes into play. Now, there's no telling how long this video is going to be. This video could be an hour long. It could be 5 minutes. Um, but like I said, I had no plan to make this video up until a couple weeks ago, where like this stuff started happening. People I was talking to, people I met, and then ultimately which led to today where I would make this video. So before I get into any of the stories that I have to tell, I'm gonna read the verse. It is Hebrews. Hang on, Hebrews 5, chapter 5, verse 13. Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have, for he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Now, when it says for he himself has said, that's God. God has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And that's on one of, I've probably made a video about this verse, about that specific line before. Um, but that's one of the, honestly, in my opinion, one of the best promises that you see, in the Bible. And I think that, it's a promise that everybody should kind of hold on to and everything. No, for God himself has said he will never leave us nor forsake us. Now, if you don't know what forsake means, it kind of means the same thing as leave. He's not going to leave us. He's not going to turn away from us. The exact definition is, I don't know what the exact definition is, but forsake means kind of turn away. He's not going to turn away from us. He's not going to turn his back on us. Now, no matter how many times we turn away from God and how many times we leave God, he's never going to leave us. He's not going to be like, okay, well, you left me, so I'm going to leave you. And that's a big promise. God is a promise keeper. He's never going to break his promises, no matter, like I said, no matter how many times we turn away and leave him. He keeps his promises. He knows who we are, what we're going to do. And I've said this several times before. He knows what's going to happen to us before we know. He knew I was going to make this video on April 29th, 2026 at 4:06 p.m. And God knows these things. God knows what we're going to be doing 20 years down the road. Now, the reason I'm making this video is, and the reason this verse plays out into this, is because the past couple weeks I've been, talking to people. I've been meeting people, who have been in church, but kind of left, I guess you can say. They not necessarily turned their backs on God, but they kind of turned away. Now, obviously, there's several reasons why a person could leave church, I'm not going to go into any personal details. I'm not going to name names. And then, so if you're here for gossip or tea, you're not getting none of that here. So there's several reasons why a person could leave a church. They can move away and not be able to make a drive to their home church or the church they used to go to. And that's a big factor. And you see that a lot. And another really big one, and I may have talked about it. I've heard, people I look up to preach on this several times, preach on church hurt, and talked about it, and church hurt is, it's not like, oh, I fell in a church and broke my knee, I'm never going back. but it's where like something can happen. I guess you can say emotionally, something can like somebody can say something to you, and you're like, oh, is that how things go here? And kind of leave, or even to an extent to where it's like they feel that God has turned away from them, and they feel that what's the point of coming to church if God's not here? And you see that a lot, and sometimes it could be you yourself who feels that. And I've been completely honest and blunt about some of the things in my life. There are times where I have felt, that God was not there for me, and what was the point of going to church if I didn't feel God? And I believe that everybody should be in church. Obviously, if you choose not to go to church, that's you. But God loves everybody. I feel everybody should be in church. It doesn't matter if you're Baptist, Catholic, Pentecostal, whatever. I mean, me myself, I'm Pentecostal, so I know a lot about different. I'm not saying I know more. I'm not saying being Pentecostal is like Pentecostalism is better than say being a Baptist. It's all the same. It's the same religion. You may worship or do things differently, but ultimately we are worshiping the same God. But that's off topic. That may be another topic for another video. But what I'm saying is people will feel that God has ultimately left them, and that's not true. And because he says in Hebrews 5:13, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And that's the one line we're really going to focus on in this video. But people feel that God has ultimately left them, and that's not the case. And they feel a lot of emotional damage. Somebody's going to make a meme about that because of the old meme, emotional damage, but that's not the point I'm trying to make. But they feel so much, mental and emotional damage that they feel that God could never love them. And that's not true. I've heard the saying so many times that God gives his strongest warriors or his strongest angels the toughest battles. And I think, that's true. You could be living your worst life where you're depressed every day, or you could be living your best life where you're happy and you have everything you can want. God still loves you. And, I've ultimately, like I said, this is the reason I'm making this video. I've met people, and there's this one guy I was talking to, I think it was probably like 2 or 3 days ago, actually. I was talking to him, we were texting, and he's like, bro, I ultimately feel that, I'm saying ultimately a lot, but it's like, I ultimately feel that, like, God doesn't love me, and that he left. And I asked him why, and he didn't go into detail, and I'm not going to go into detail on what he said, but he said that he just felt abandoned. He felt abandoned by God, that he felt like he could do nothing good. And I listened to him, like I listened to what he had to say, and I sat down, I talked to him, I said, look, bro, God works in mysterious ways. I don't know how God works. The preachers, the pastors of this world ultimately don't know how God is going to work. We don't know what God is going to do and we don't know why he does the things he does. But ultimately, it says it right here, Hebrews 5. I keep wanting to say 13 and 5, but it's 5:13. I will never leave you nor forsake you. That word never, and that word never has a good meaning behind it. Because, you say, oh, I'm never going to do something. Like, I'm never going to do this, or I'm never going to do that. And ultimately, like, you see people say, oh, I'm never going to turn to drugs, or I'm never going to drink. And then what happens? They do. Now, I'm not saying God is going to leave us. I'm not trying to imply that. I'm saying God does not say he's going to do something and then do the opposite. He's not going to say he's not going to leave us and then leave us. He's not going to do that. God's, like I said earlier, God's a promise keeper. He keeps his promises. This is one of, honestly, the best promises that you can find in the Bible. I will never leave you nor forsake you. And honestly, that's something I hold on to strongly every day. Every day I read the Word, I find myself in Hebrews reading that verse, and if I get emotional, I'm sorry. I feel like something deep when I read that verse. When I read through Hebrews, I feel that you know you could live your best life, you could live your worst life. God's not going to leave us. Um, and some people ultimately feel that God doesn't love them, and sometimes they even feel to an extent that God isn't real. And I met somebody probably at the beginning of this year, close to the beginning of this year. I think it's back in like maybe early January, maybe even like late December. Like late December, early January, I met this guy on Discord, and we were kind of talking. And he told me he told me he went to church as a kid, and then his parents kind of stopped going, and so he stopped. And he asked me, he's like, do you go to church? Have you ever gone to church? I'm like, I go to church. I'm at church every Sunday and Wednesday. And I asked him why, and that's when he started saying, my parents used to go to church, and I would go to church all the time with them, but they stopped going, so I ultimately made the same decision to stop going. And he didn't go back to church for, I think he said probably 3 months. They didn't go to church. And he was ultimately he still read his Bible, but he was a young kid at this time, so he didn't really understand really what he was reading. I feel like that's all young kids. You read something, especially the Bible, where you don't really understand. You don't catch on to what it means until later on. And they went back to church. I'm not gonna say where they went or where they started going to again, but they ultimately started going again. And he said they went for probably 3-4 months. And mind you, this was back when he was a young kid. So he was around maybe 7 or 8. I'm not going to say his actual age, but it was around 7, 8, that age range. And they were in church for probably 4 months. And his dad stopped going, but him and his mom still went. So he's like, well, dad stopped going, but I'm going to keep going as long as mom goes. You know how kids are. They're like, why does dad not have to go? Or why is dad not going? Or why vice versa if your mom stopped. But his dad stopped going to church, but him and his mom still went. And he was telling me, at this point, it felt forced. He felt like he was being forced to go. And in my opinion, I feel that in my opinion, I don't think you should be forced to go. You should want to go to church. You should have that desire in your heart to go to church on Sundays and Wednesdays and worship God. It should be a want, you shouldn't be forced into it. Now, obviously, if you're a baby and your parents bring you, you can't really make that choice. But once you're able to walk and talk, ultimately, I feel it is your decision. If you go to church, that's all you. Oh, excuse me, that is on you. But he said he ultimately felt forced into going to church. So he didn't feel any, he didn't feel spiritually led. He didn't feel anything during this time. And he ultimately like stopped going. Maybe a month or two after his dad stopped going, he stopped going, and his mom still went. His mom was very active in that church, and I think maybe a couple weeks. It wasn't long after my friend stopped going that his dad started going again. So they were kind of wonky at it, not wonky, but eh. And his dad ended up getting, like he felt spiritually led to help in the church, so he was started becoming more active. And my friend, my buddy, who told me this story, they didn't they they didn't force him to go at this point. They stopped trying, and I think that's where ultimately, if you're watching this, bro, I hope you're okay with me telling this. But ultimately, I think that's where it kind of went down. They didn't force him, so he moved farther and farther away from God. Now, like I said before, God doesn't leave us. He's never going to leave us or forsake us. He's always with us. He eventually spiraled into a depression. Now he's still about 7, 8 in that age range. At this time, I think he was about to have a birthday, close to it, and he's 18 now. Just saying. So this was several years ago. I just think it's a good story to tell going along with this, what I'm talking about. But he ultimately, it's like, moved away from his parents because they became really religious, which is, I think that's a good thing. I believe everybody should, like I said, I believe everybody should be in church. But he moved away from his parents, moved in with, I think, some cousins. I think he said. Text me if I'm wrong, bro. I know you have my Discord still. We talk a lot. But he moved in with some cousins and ultimately just, I think, went down the wrong path. I'm not gonna. I've talked about this kind of stuff before. You can probably put two and two together. Don't type in the comments saying, did he do this or did he do that? Don't do that. But he made some very wrong decisions, some very bad decisions. And he knew they were wrong, but he still did them. Which I think is how everybody is. You do these things like, you're like, I'm not supposed to do this, but you do them anyway. And ultimately, that's, I believe, what pushes us farther away from God is when we know that what we are doing is wrong, and we do them anyway. And eventually, like, several years went past. He was probably 14, 15. So, several years had gone by. He's still living with his cousin, still doing these things, but they were aggressively worse. Um, his parents eventually went back and got him, like, okay, this is enough. You're gonna come back, stay with us. We're gonna, obviously, things have to change, and things changed. He ultimately stopped doing the things he was doing, but he was left in, this dark, dark place. You feel nobody loves you, nobody cares, and ultimately you feel abandoned by everybody. And he was telling me, I ultimately felt abandoned by God. He was blaming everybody but himself. He was even blaming God for where he ended up and why he was in this dark place. And we texted, and there were times where we would sit on the call for hours talking about this. And he ultimately, he's his mom and dad. They sat him down like, hey, would you like to come to church with us? We're not going to force you. If you say no, that's it. But if you would like to come, we'd be more than happy to have you. And he's like, he was like, you know what? Why not? I'm gonna go just to go, see what this is about. And I feel that's how most people are when they get invited to church. He goes, and he said to me, it felt like you had friends, but they weren't really your friends. They just looked at you. Like everybody looked at him, and people talked to him. They went up and talked to him, but ultimately he said he felt distant from everybody, even his parents, who they've been at that church for a couple, like since he was young, and they were active in the church too. They didn't just show up and like, okay, hey, what's up, brother? They were very active in the church. And he said that first Sunday he went, didn't really feel nothing. They went home, and then that same week, that Wednesday morning, they said, hey, would you like to come to church with us tonight? And he's like, church on a Wednesday? You know what? I'll try it. He said like when you first go to church and like you're going and like you don't feel nothing, and then that one day you feel something. He described it as like something tugging at his heart. And he didn't know what to make of it. He thought he was just, overreacting about being at church. He's like, and then he went home and he asked his mom and dad. Was sitting with them, in the living room talking. And they said that was God. And at this point, he's like, he still felt that God wasn't with him. So it's like, that wasn't God. I just felt weird. And they kept telling him, that was God. And, for the next couple of days, they were asking him, like, hey, how you feeling? You want to go back to church? You want to go talk about this? And he kept saying no. And it was probably maybe 2 weeks go by. He didn't go back to church. And then after that 2 weeks, he goes on a Sunday. And he says, Hayden, I really felt that, like, that something wanted me to be there. And I'm like, dude, that's God. God wanted you to be there for something, to save you. And then he told me during the 2 weeks he didn't go, he felt that tugging since every Sunday and Wednesday. He felt it, and he felt like something was pulling, like trying to pull his heart out of his chest is how he described it. And about after that 2 weeks, he goes back and he still felt different. He felt like an outcast, which is reasonably okay. If you start going to church, you can feel like an outcast. It is okay. I'm not saying you go and you automatically fit in. But, he goes back. He starts going more and more. He went for maybe a month. Then after that 1 month went by, he got baptized and he was saved. And ultimately that shows that, God doesn't leave us. You might be thinking, gosh, he told that whole story. How's this tie in with this? God was able to bring him through that difficult time. From that first time he went after his parents went and got him to the point to where he was baptized and saved. That doesn't just happen. You don't just get baptized for the fun of it, You do it because you feel something. You feel called to do it. And ultimately, that's what we do. When we feel called to do something, like spiritually, like in our mind, and this is what this is, this ties into I will never leave you nor forsake you. When and this has been said to me several times, this has been taught several times, when you think in your mind, when you think, I'm going to read my Bible, or I'm going to pray, or I'm going to go to church, that is not you. That is God telling you. Like, that's God speaking through you. Hey, you should pray. Hey, you should read the Word. Hey, you should go to church. That's not your flesh is never going to tell you to read the Bible. And the enemy, Satan, is never going to tell you to read the Bible or go to church. He's never going to. And ultimately, that's where all of this ties in by this promise. I will never leave you nor forsake you. That's one of the most beautiful promises, one of the best promises in all of Scripture. You know, you could, like I said, you could be living your worst life. You could be down in the dumps. God's not gonna leave you. He's not gonna forsake you. He's not gonna turn his back to you, and he's not gonna just abandon you. And you see so many people who feel abandoned by God. And I wish I could reach all of them. I wish I could tell them this. But if you know somebody who feels abandoned by God, read them this verse. It's Hebrews chapter 5 verse 13. And ultimately, I feel everybody should know this verse. Everybody should know, if you've read your Bible, even if you've read it once, or you've been to church at least maybe a couple times, you will know this. And this is, I'm trying not to get emotional, but like I said, I hold on to this verse every single day with every ounce of my fiber in my being. I hold on to this verse. And like I said, this video isn't scripted. I didn't have notes or nothing to read off of. This is just me in my spirit feeling stuff that I should share. And if you know somebody who could like I've said this in every single one of my videos, if you know somebody who could benefit from this, if you know somebody who can really truly benefit, even if they want entertainment to watch and they want Bible entertainment to watch, show them this video. And if you know somebody who feels abandoned and who needs to hear this, show them this video. And I ultimately feel that, like I've said, I want to reach people every day. If at least one of my videos could reach somebody every day, even if it's just one, that's a goal. I love y'all. Normally I would say, oh, let's get to 100, let's get to 80 subscribers. I'm not doing that today. I feel that is not needed right now. I love y'all. I love everybody. Thank you all for being so patient. I need to be more consistent, I know, but I love y'all. And remember, God will never leave you nor forsake you. He's always there. I love y'all. I will see y'all in the next video. Deuces.